interest in the natural world since childhood, and this was heightened when he moved from Northern California to Tucson in 1978 while he was in high school. During this time, he started working in natural history collections at the University of Arizona, eventually receiving his undergraduate degree in fine art and painting and graduate degree in entomology, both at the University of Arizona. For the past 37 years, he studied insects and other arthropods of Arizona and the Sonoran Desert. Prior to managing the U of A insect collection the past 9 years, he managed collections at the University of Nebraska State Museum in Lincoln and the University of Colorado Museum of Natural History in Boulder. Natural history collections preserve and document our planet's biodiversity. He strives to make the U of A insect collection an active and accessible resource for scientists who use specimens and associated data for research and public outreach. Additionally, he provides insect and other arthropod identifications by overseeing the Insect Diagnostic Clinic, fulfilling the university cooperative extensions mission to citizens, industry, public health, and economic security to the state of Arizona. His research program focuses on evolutionary biology of insects, primarily the systematics, taxonomy, and biogeographic of beetles, most notably, and I'll probably say this wrong again, but the Tilidae featherwing beetles, which is the smallest beetle in the world. He's studied fossil insects associated with pack rat mid-dens to better understand past and recent fauna, flora, and climates of the Southwest Desert. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Gene Hall.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Very happy to be here. Just want to give the participants a heads up. I'm doing this talk from home today due to some home issues. So if you occasionally hear a dog barking, I will do my best to deal with that. Or if you hear them drinking out of their water dish right next to me. So, yeah, I appreciate the introduction. That pretty much says what I'm about. And today for my talk, I will be giving you an overview of the University of Arizona insect collection. Then I'll be talking about some of the things we do with the Insect Diagnostics Clinic. After that, I will go into some different arthropod groups, including arachnids and millipedes and centipedes. And then we'll take a break, and then I will jump into an overview of the insects. And then we'll take another break partially through that. And this is basically just to give you an idea, excuse me, about the work that I do, what we're all about in the insect collection, insect diagnostics, but also an overview of some of the insects and other arthropods that you may encounter in Arizona. So let me just get moving here to the first slide. There we go. All right. So let's see here. So this is just kind of an idea of what the collection looks like, how we house things. We're located in the Department of Entomology, and so that has been associated with the College of Agriculture since the mid-1950s, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on along here. But we do have a departmental website, and can you guys see the screen okay? I just want to make sure I'm not blocking anything off here. Okay.
It looks fine, Gene.
Okay. Good. And so if you want to learn more about us, please go to the department's website. We also have a website for the University of Arizona Insect Collection. And I encourage all of you to visit this website and to go to these different scroll down menus here at the top to find out more about us, what we do there, the kind of research, what goes on for the resources we provide. We're located on the U of A campus in this building here on the lower right. That's the Forbes building. It's the College of Agriculture. And we're located up on the top floor, on the fourth floor, room 410. Just to give you a heads up though, because of everything that's going on with COVID and other policies enacted during the pandemic, We're currently closed to visitors and tours, but normally when we are open to accept visitors and tours, um, our hours of operation are generally 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Please contact me ahead of time because I'm the lone sole staff member of the collection. So I'm the one who gives the tours, shows people the collection. I help with all the insect IDs and stuff. But I'll talk more about that later. But when we do get back to normal swing of things, please call ahead of time if you feel like visiting. The University of Arizona Insect Collection houses over 2 million specimens, and it's the largest collection in the world of Arizona and northern Sonoran Desert insects. About 80% of our material is identified to the species level. So that's very important because when you're working with an organism, you need to know exactly what species you're dealing with to have the right name, to learn all the data and knowledge associated with that species. Currently, we have probably a little over 35,000 species within the collection, and about 20,000 of those are species that live in Arizona. And Arizona is definitely a hot spot for insect and other arthropod diversity. And the foundations of the entomology department and the collection are in the College of Agriculture. Some of the first degrees at the U of A were agriculture degrees, and a lot of work was done during that time on livestock pests and crop pests and such. And so that's whenever the insect collection started being built. So it's a very old collection. It's a very active research collection, but it does have deep roots within the College of Agriculture and the University of Arizona. And as I mentioned, Arizona is home to the highest amount of insect diversity in North America. I should say that we're probably in the top 2 or 3 places in North America for insect and other arthropod diversity. And this slide here, this image on the right, shows you what the insect collection looks like. Specimens are kept in these compactors, and then the offices to the collection go along across the hall from that. And one of the things that has allowed us to build such a great and important collection is our mission is to build and maintain the world's best source of arthropod specimens from the Sonoran Desert region and host a global center for insect research. So besides being the largest insect collection in Arizona, we are actually the largest collection in the world for Arizona and northern Sonoran Desert insects. And this happens because of the diversity of landscape and climate that we have in our area. So you've got all these different influences, environmental happening, geographical, geological. And so as people know who live here in Tucson, where I work, you can be here in the desert and then within 35, 45 minutes, you can be up on the top of Mount Lemmon over 9,000 feet in a wooded forest. And so that alone just gives you an idea of how diverse our landscape is. And so it's because of all of these various factors that allow for such a great abundance of arthropod diversity in our region. And that's our main focus here. You know, we focus primarily on Arizona and Sonoran Desert arthropods and from adjacent regions. We do have specimens from other parts of the United States and other regions of North America. And that's for comparative purposes, for identifications and for systematics research and such. But we do mainly focus on Sonoran Desert region and the rest of Arizona. Just a few years ago, somebody wanted to donate 40,000 specimens of insects to us from Brazil. And I had to tell them we can't do that. One, we don't have the space. Two, we don't have the personnel power to take care of that. I'm the lone staff person for the collection. Everybody else who works in the collection, students, volunteers and such, those are paid off of grant-funded projects. So I'm the lone staff member for the collection. So I'm the main person who keeps things going. And otherwise, we're just mainly focused on our area to be the best collection in the world for our region. Another thing that we're doing is advancing the digitization of biological research collections group, and we're part of Symbiota Collections of Arthropods Network. And this is a group of collections. It originally started in the Southwest and then now is branched out all over North America and elsewhere, where we're digitizing our collections. We're taking photographs of individual specimens and the associated label data. So that information is available online for researchers and the public too. So here on the left, you'll notice each one of these A's here and that record, that's an individual specimen from the collection. And what we're doing is we're photographing this, and these are the associated labels that go with this specimen. The specimen was collected in the Black Mountains of North Carolina in June 15th, 1912. And at the bottom of that, you'll see where it says UAIC 1009040. That's a unique identifier that we have assigned to each specimen in the collection. So no two specimens in the UAIC have the same number. Now, this is a long-term project. We have over 2 million specimens. Photographing each one at a time takes a while. This is mainly happening because we're able to hire undergraduate students through grant-funded projects to be able to do this. So I think right now we maybe have like 130, 140,000 species online right now. Anybody can go to this database, just go to scan, and you can do a search by the taxon name, and then the records will show up. Another thing that we have going on is we have a ancient DNA lab. So this is very important because in the past, when you wanted to do molecular analysis on insects and other arthropods, you pretty much had to collect specimens in 100% alcohol to preserve the specimen and to prevent the DNA from degrading. Well, now there are methods and techniques for being able to do extractions from these specimens to be able to analyze the degraded DNA. And we're lucky enough, the Schlinger Foundation was able to provide us with the funding to be able to build this ancient DNA lab within the insect collection area. And we're actually one of the very few insect collections, university-based in North America, that has its own ancient DNA lab on premises. And so you can think about this, where in the past you had to collect live specimens and then preserve them to have fresh material. And that sort of limited what you could do, because if you wanted to look at a particular species, like say if it occurs in Japan or other parts of the world, you'd have to travel there to collect fresh material. But now you can borrow or examine older material from other museum collections to be able to get this ancient DNA. So this cuts down costs of having to travel to try to find a particular species of insect out in the wild. And it also increases the interactions of museums worldwide by providing the specimens for this kind of research. And so it greatly expands our knowledge about the biodiversity of the world. Oops. Another thing that we get involved with, is the Arizona Insect Festival, which unfortunately did not happen last year or this year due to the pandemic. But this is an annual event that we started hosting in 2011. It's a free event where people are encouraged to bring themselves and their families, relatives, friends, whatever. Parking is free, the event is free. We generally average around 5,000 to 6,000 people within the 4 to 5 hours that we hold this event. It's a one-day event, usually on a Sunday in October. We do it on Sunday so we don't compete with football on Saturdays at the U of A. But anyways, I encourage anybody, if you get a chance to attend the Insect Festival, people travel far and wide to attend this event. I frequently have met people who have traveled all the way from Southern California, Northern Arizona, New Mexico to attend this. And it's been interesting to do this because as the years go by, I've been able to see a lot of the repeats of people bringing their kids and the kids getting older and such. But it's a great event. I encourage you to go. It's in a building, 2 floors worth of displays, interpretive exhibits about insects and other arthropods. And it's all the faculty and staff in the Department of Entomology at the U of A, plus entomologists in ecology and evolutionary biology participate, but also other organizations too. I think at time we've had the Botanical Gardens participate, Audubon Society. So there's a lot going on with this. So if you get a chance, please attend this. It's free, parking's free, the event is free, and that's a good deal. Another thing we do at times is also work with local artists. So sometimes when our artists need to use insects either for illustration work or for artwork that they're working on, they will come and visit us, take a look at our specimens, and work on their project. This is just an example of Bobby Long, who works, he's an artist, and he came into our collection a few times, and these are examples of the drawings he did from specimens from our collection. He would look at the specimen on the pin and do a sketch, take a few pictures, and then he would work on the artwork. And so this happens a lot. You know, we provide images, we provide photos of specimens, and we do allow artists and photographers to visit to be able to take advantage of what we have if needed for artistic research or creative purposes. So here's a little bit now about the Insect Diagnostics Clinic. That's a lot of that, what I just talked about is how the U of A insect collection works and what it does. And now I'll talk about the Insect Diagnostics Clinic, which also works along with the University of Arizona insect collection. So besides managing the U of A insect collection, I also oversee the Insect Diagnostics Clinic. And we have a team though. I'm not the sole person who does this. Besides myself, there's other people, Peter Ellsworth, Don Gouge, Al Fournier, Shaku Nair, Lucy Lee, and Naomi Peer. They are all up at the Maricopa Ag Center. Wendy Moore, she's a curator of the U of A insect collection and also a professor in the Department of Entomology at the University of Arizona. John Palumbo, he works at the Yuma Ag Center. And Alex Hu oversees the plant pathology part of the University of Arizona's cooperative extension. He deals with people that send plants in that may have a problem with disease or viruses or whatever. So it's a good team of people that we've got working on this diagnostics clinic together. Mainly what happens is generally people send me specimens for identification purposes, and then I provide the ID. And if I get in a rut or I need input, then I consult with the other team members and vice versa. They get specimens sent to them too. If they need input, then we work together as a team to come to some kind of resolution. So we respond to inquiries. This can be anybody from the general public to industry. Another thing we do is we update and produce new extension bulletins so we can get information out to the residents and other stakeholders of the state of Arizona and beyond about insects, pests, and beneficial species in our state. We also develop a website for publication information on pests and beneficials. So I'll just show you that in a minute. There is a website where we house all this information, which is accessible and free to the public. And work with master gardeners and other groups to provide education on the insects and other arthropods within our region so that they may also use that information to help others out. I have to say here how important master gardener is because generally they're kind of like on the front lines a lot of the time with people wanting to know what something is, what an insect is that's in their yard, feeding on their plants or whatever. So it's good that we're able to work with master gardeners to be able to provide the education for them to know what they might be dealing with. And, you know, that kind of frees up some of my time and effort to work on other inquiries that could be coming in. But I do get a lot of inquiries from master gardeners because there's a lot of diversity of insects in the state of Arizona. It's very difficult to know all of them and what they're doing and what they can do. So anyways, it's a good working relationship that we have with master gardener. So whenever I receive specimens for identification, generally we request that people fill out an insect identification sheet. You can find these two ways. This right here shows where it's located on the University of Arizona insect collection website. Just go to the head menu here of insect identification, click on that, and then you'll see some information about completing the submission form and instructions for submitting samples and the email to send that to if you're going to be sending a photograph or also any kind of correspondence related to insect identifications. You can go to this email or you can email me directly. My email is on the website. You can get it here from the talk. And generally, most of my inquiries come directly to my U of A email. And This form is also available on the Arizona Pest Management Center website. So go to this website, and besides finding the form for submitting insects for identification, this is the website that has all of the different publications available that Cooperative Extension has put out on insect pests and also beneficial insects. And when you get to this website, pardon me, you can scroll to the top of the menu here and select any of these menus that may be of interest. But if you're looking for insects to be identified, you go to the pest identification menu, click on that, and you'll receive the same information on how to submit a sample for ID. This is what the insect identification submission form looks like. This gives us an idea about who collected it, where it was collected, when it was collected, what it was doing, and then also how the client maybe wanted to be contacted, either by email or by phone. And then down here below is more information to fill out for the identification purposes. Not everybody is going to be able to fill out all of this information completely, and that's perfectly fine. The basic thing for me is if I know who submitted this, where it was found, how to contact the person, and what was going on and the reason for the concern. So this is what the insect ID submission form looks like, and we request that it be submitted with all samples, whether that's samples submitted in mail, dropped off at the entomology department, or sent to me an email attachment. And the reason why this is important is because we need to be able to accurately identify specimens so we know exactly what we're dealing with, whether we're dealing with a pest species or a non-pest species. So for example, on the left here is the false chinch bug, which usually comes out in the springtime, sometimes in great numbers to the aggravation of people, though there's really nothing you can do about these. But anyways, so the false chinch bug is generally considered a pest, even though it's feeding on mustards and weedy things that generally, people don't have high concern about. But they do show up in great numbers. They can get into people's homes. They do get on the walls of people's houses on the outside. So people consider them to be a nuisance. Sometimes people may even try to spray to kill these off, which is very ineffective. There's no real treatment for false chinch bugs. You have to wait them out. But, at the same time, they may be confusing what they're seeing as actually the big-eyed bugs, which are actually a beneficial insect. Big-eyed bugs feed on other insects, so they're considered a beneficial species. Now, in these close-up photographs, you can obviously see the difference between these two, but at the naked eye level, they look kind of similar because of their shape, their coloration, their size, and such. So it's very important to know when you're dealing with something, are you dealing with something that's a pest or a potential pest, or are you actually dealing with something that's a beneficial insect that is out there feeding on insects, including potential or pest species? So you need to know what you're dealing with before you start thinking about any kind of treatment recommendations. And another reason why this is important was a good example is last year. Last year, the Asian giant hornet was in the news. It was in big news. And as soon as the news came out about this, the first thing that popped into my head was, oh boy, people are going to start confusing this with the cicada killer wasps that we have here whenever they start showing up during cicada season. And sure enough, once the cicada killer wasp started showing up, I got a lot of calls from people saying that they had the Asian giant hornet in their yard and what to do about it. So to deal with this, we put together an extension bulletin. This is the 2 pages of the bulletin. This is the first page and this is the second page, showing photographs of the Asian giant hornet and then showing photographs of the cicada killer wasp. Here's the Asian giant hornet here on the panel on the right. And then we did some photographs of other things, bumblebees and wasps that people were also confusing it with. And then below were 2 images of the different species, excuse me, of cicada killer wasps that occur in our region. So by doing this, we're providing the public with information so they can accurately identify what they're seeing and then make decisions, informed decisions that way. We still encourage people to contact us anytime they think they may have something that's an invasive in the state, because that's one of the things we track and keep an eye on. And the same thing happened this year. I got a lot of calls about cicada killer wasp, that people mistaking them for the Asian giant hornet. Just so everybody knows, the Asian giant hornet is still only known from the Pacific Northwest of North America. It hasn't made it this far. I doubt it ever will. It needs forested, damp, moist conditions to survive. And we just don't have that here in the desert. And plus, it's a long stretch for it to make it that far. And another thing is, as I mentioned before, like with the big-eyed bug, correct identifications let us know if something's a beneficial insect. Praying mantids are beneficial. They feed on other insects, including pest species. So if you see a praying mantid, just let it do its thing, enjoy watching it and the beauty of it, but no reason for concern. Same thing with lady beetles, ladybugs, as they're commonly also called. They feed on aphids, including the immature stage of the ladybug. So these are aphid feeders. They're considered a beneficial insect. They feed on what we consider to be pests. So if you see ladybugs out, just let them do their thing. They're not going to be eating your plant. And so these are beneficials, and it's good to know the difference between the pest species and the beneficial species. So just to give you an idea about insect diagnostics and how this goes, last year in 2020, even during the pandemic, I had close to 500 unique individual inquiries that were submitted. As you can see, most of these were by email, 40 of them by phone, 395 by email, and 55 were drop-offs to the entomology department. But generally these days, most people will send me photographs as email attachments if they're concerned about a particular insect or insect damage. And so I will have to say, last year during the pandemic, there were a lot of people in Arizona who usually weren't here during that time because they would come here for the winter, then go back to New York or Chicago or whatever, whenever the summer hit. Well, a lot of them were stuck here during that period. So they did see a lot of insects here that they normally would not have seen if they had just stayed through their winter and spring visit. And so I did get a lot of inquiries last year from people who were kind of forced to be here during the COVID closures and shutdowns. But I usually average more inquiries than this, usually 500, sometimes 600 inquiries a year, close to 600, if not more. But also last year was a very hot, dry year. And this also had a big impact on the diversity of insects that were out and the numbers of insects that were out. And so I attribute these lower numbers probably to the extreme hot and dry conditions we experienced last year. In Tucson this year, we had nearly, 13 inches of rain for monsoon. Last year, we had 1.6 inches of rain for monsoon season. And monsoon season is generally when the highest diversity of insects and other arthropods occurs in our region. We also keep track of invasive species. So about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I started getting inquiries about the bougainvillea caterpillar. Feeding on bougainvillea, it just seems to do a pretty good job of stripping the leaves down. The sugarcane aphid, back, I think it was 2016, had not been previously recorded in our state, though it was an invasive that was showing up in other states along the south and such. And we had an inquiry from a grower up in Maricopa finding these aphids on his sorghum. Peter Ellsworth had the samples sent to me, and I confirmed for the first time that this species, this invasive species, was active in the state of Arizona. And so USDA was informed about that, and they sent out bulletins to growers. The red bug is something you might be seeing. This is one invasive that USDA really isn't too concerned about because of the weedy plants and such that it feeds on. But it's starting to show up in more and more in larger numbers and in wider distribution throughout the state. And so that's another one that we'll be keeping an eye on. And then one of the big ones this year was the pecan pecan bud moth. So samples were sent to me from growers in southeastern Arizona, and I was able to identify these as the pecan bud moth, which up until that time was found only as far west as Texas. It hadn't been recorded yet in New Mexico or Arizona. But I was able to confirm this identification using both morphological techniques, which means examining the specimens, comparing them to other specimens, doing dissections and such. But we also barcoded this species. And that way we looked at the DNA, we processed that, and the barcoding matched it up also to the pecan bud moth that exists in the barcode database. So we used morphological analysis and molecular analysis to confirm the presence of an invasive species within the state of Arizona. And then we put out this bulletin here, this 2-page bulletin, to inform growers and other residents of Arizona about the presence of this moth within the state. And so it's just another example of what we do and why we do what we do for the stakeholders and residents of Arizona. So right now, I'm just going to do a little overview about arthropods, and I'll be discussing different aspects of their systematics, taxonomy. I'll talk a little bit later about the insect morphology, life cycles, and such. But for right now, I'm going to go through some of the non-insect groups just to give you an idea of some organisms that you might come across as inquiries or while you're out in your own yard or taking a hike or whatever. So the first group I'm going to deal with will be the arachnids, and everybody's familiar with arachnids on some level. You've got your ticks, your mites, your spiders, scorpions, sulpuges, and such. And one thing I wanted to say is a lot of these slides might have a lot of information on them. Some of it I won't necessarily go over because then I could do that for each individual group for a 2 or 3 hour lecture. But this talk, PDF of this talk, of this slideshow will be provided to you to look back on later in case you missed something that I've talked about, because we're limited on time here and about how much information I can provide. So if you miss something here, you'll get a chance yourself to go back and take a look at it. Okay. So the first group are the ticks, the acari, and also this includes the mites. You'll be seeing a lot of these, probably more frequently the mites than ticks, though we do get brown dog ticks and such in the state of Arizona. And we do have some people in the entomology department and Maricopa Ag Center that are involved in tick studies right now. We're trying to put together a list of the ticks that live in Arizona, what their distribution is, the different species. So look forward in the future to some extension bulletins on ticks. But you're probably going to come across more frequently something like the 2-spotted spider mite. These are plant juice feeders. They got slicing and lapping mouth parts. Here on the lower left is what the mite looks like. This, and the photograph in the middle sort of gives you an idea of the webbing and such that you'll see with the mites running around here. And also, here's some more images to the right of these mites on the plants. So I get a lot of inquiries about a lot of mites every year, and the majority of the time they're spider mites, and a lot of the time it's the 2-spotted spider mite. So this is one thing to be aware of. So if you see this kind of webbing on a plant, it's not necessarily a spider that's doing that. There's a good chance it's a spider mite. One thing I also want to let you know right now at this stage is I'm not going to provide information about treatment recommendations or what to do about the things I'm talking about. I don't provide that kind of information. What I mainly provide is information about an organism, an identification, information about its biology, and then it's up to the client to go from there, whether that's looking at extension bulletins for treatment recommendations or whatever. But I'm not licensed to provide treatment chemical recommendations. For me to do that would be a liability issue. and the university doesn't want that. I sure don't want that. And so you'll notice whenever I go through all these different groups, I just gave you a quick rundown about spider mites, and then I'm going to go on to the next thing. I'm not going to tell you what to do about them, how to deal with them. You can make other inquiries for people about that. I just mainly provide identifications. Another group you're going to probably see a lot of, and especially here in the Southwest, are spiders. And we have a great diversity of spiders in this state. Spiders, I guess people are they get a bad rap. People are kind of spooked by them because they move pretty quickly and they've got fangs and such. And they can bite if they need to defend themselves. They use the fangs for envenomization of the prey that they're feeding on. And there's no metamorphosis. Basically what you have with the spiders, you have an egg, and then that hatches into a spiderling, and that eventually goes through some molts and into an adult. So, and most spiders have silky webs. Here on the left, you'll see the Arizona brown spider. It's related to the brown recluse. It's in the same genus, Loxosceles, though it's not the same species, Reclusa. We have many species of brown spiders in the state of Arizona. So they're widespread throughout the state, especially outside of city areas. You don't see them that much like in the city, like directly in Tucson or in Phoenix and such. But you'll find them a lot in more desert rural areas in the Southwest. We do have black widows here. Which were in great abundance this year. We do have wolf spiders. We have jumping spiders. And one thing I like to put along for spiders is spiders are beneficial arthropods. They feed on other insects, or they feed on insects, I should say. Spiders aren't insects, but they feed on insects and other arthropods, including species that we may consider to be pests. So spiders are a good thing. And generally when I find a spider at my home, depending on what kind it is, I either leave it here, or if it bothers me, I will collect it and then put it outdoors. But spiders are a beneficial arthropod, and so we should treat them as such. Another group are the Apiliones, the daddy longlegs. These are relatives of spiders, but they differ in having chewing mouth parts, and they don't spin silk. There's a difference between these and things that are called like daddy long, so there's another group of spiders that people consider to be daddy longlegs also. Those are cellar spiders, and those have long legs. These are a different group. They're generally predators. There's no metamorphosis. And, again, they're feeding on other insects. And so they're also considered a beneficial organism, arthropod, within our region. Next are the scorpions. We do have a great diversity of scorpions in the state. The habitat here is perfect for them, dry and warm. And though you do get some at higher elevations, most of these occur in the lower elevations in the desert. They have pedipalps with the pinchers towards the front. They have 8 walking legs, and they have the tail called a telson that has a stinger at the end. The telson is the stinger at the end. So they're great predators. They feed on other arthropods, including insects, and so they're also considered beneficial. Again, there's no metamorphosis here. The eggs hatch, the individuals develop, and then they turn into the adult after molting and such. So, and some of these things will fluoresce in yellow and green under ultraviolet light. And so if you have concerns about scorpions within your residence, within your home, you can walk around at night with a black light, and they will fluoresce, and you will see them. They'll be this kind of yellow greenish glow color. A lot of people do that who live out in the desert. They will do that in their homes at night, or sometime in their property around their home, to try to find scorpions. But again, this is another beneficial. It feeds on other organisms. It feeds on insects that we may consider to be pests. So if you see scorpions, just let them do their thing, relocate them if you need to. You can't, I'm not giving out treatment recommendations, but to spray for scorpions or do chemical treatments is ineffective. So it's basically, that's whenever you're dealing with, you have a residence that is allowing insects and other arthropods to get inside because maybe there's a a gap under the doors or whatever that allows things to walk in, or you have screens on sliding glass doors or windows that have holes in them, or your place isn't airtight, the trim around the door. So, these things that get into homes are generally doing so as incidentals. And so it's basically, it's a maintenance issue. Make sure there's no way that these organisms can get into your residence if they're bothering you. One of my favorites are the sulpugids. This was one of the first arthropods, non-insect arthropods I learned about when I moved to Tucson. I'd never seen one of these before, living in Northern California. And there was one that ran across the floor of my bedroom, and I couldn't figure out what it was. They move very quickly. And I think that's one of the reasons why people kind of get freaked out about them. And, they have these very large chelicerae, these large mouth parts that they use for chewing and stuff and for catching prey. And so, whenever they're feeding, it can look a little gruesome because they're chewing and you see those chelicerae and such moving back and forth with what they're feeding on. But this is another, organism that's harmless. It's not venomous. In my 30 some odd years of living here in Arizona or studying insects and arthropods of the region, I've never known anybody to be bitten by one of these. I think you literally have to stick your finger in its mouth parts to make it happen. They will, if threatened, they'll raise up their legs as a defensive posture and such. But I've never known anybody to be bitten by one of these. And so another thing to just enjoy if you see them. If you don't like them, like I said, scoop them up somehow, get them outside, and just let them go about doing their thing. And so I'm going to move into some non-arachnid groups here. I'm going to deal with the Diplopida, which are the millipedes, and the Chiloptera, which are the centipedes. And these are also very common in our region. Millipedes, you'll recognize they have this long body, and they have 2 pairs of legs per segment, which is different from something like a centipede that has one pair of legs per segment. So that's one of the ways they differ. And there's other morphological characters that separate these groups from each other, but they're very much 2 different organisms. Millipedes are generally scavengers, they'll eat on dead organic material. You'll see them out a lot times during the summertime, during the rainy season, crossing the roads or walking through the desert. They do have chewing mouth parts. Very few things feed on these. They produce a noxious chemical, similar to quinones that are found in cyanide. And so they're probably very distasteful. It'd probably make an organism sick if they ate them, though some things do eat these. But generally, they have these defensive mechanisms that help them protect themselves. And also, whenever they are irritated, they will coil up into like a round spiral ball and defecate material to discourage handling of them. So, but again, this is another harmless arthropod that's out there. They're just scavenging on material. They're important soil builders. They're not venomous except for those chemicals that they contain in their body, which could be very distasteful and noxious. But, you see millipedes, let them do their thing. They're beautiful, beautiful beasts. Next, we go into the Chiloptera, which are the centipedes. Centipedes are a little different, whereas millipedes are round, cylindrical, centipedes are more flattened, and they only produce 1 pair of walking legs per segment. The front pair of legs wrap around the head, and they're used for envenomization of prey. And they have chewing parts for mandibles, mouth parts for mandibles. And so with the things like the giant desert centipede, you don't want to handle those. It's a very, very nasty bite. And so they feed on other organisms, whereas something like the millipede is a scavenger on plant material. Centipedes will feed on arthropods and other insects, and sometimes even other immature vertebrates. I've seen images of this. And so if you see a giant desert centipede, just let it do its thing, keep your distance from it, don't irritate it, don't ever try to handle it. They will defend themselves by biting you. This photo here that's down at the bottom, this right here where I'm circling with the cursor is the head region, and this is the tail region. And as you notice, it kind of looks similar to each other. And this is probably because it's just one, evolutionary modification where the tail region mimics the head region, which can discourage predators from going for the head and going for the tail instead. But anyway, so another arthropod that you can consider to be a beneficial, they feed on other organisms, but you don't want to handle them because the ones that we have in the desert, the giant desert centipedes, can give a nasty bite. And let's see, hexapods were formerly considered to be insects, but we do see a lot of these here. I had a lot of inquiries this year about columbella, springtails, that get into people's homes. They're attracted to moisture. So you'll find these indoors around kitchen sinks, bathroom sinks, tubs. They have a little device here that I'm circling with the cursor that allows them to spring. And that's why they're called springtails. And a lot of times people confuse them for fleas. They're not fleas. They're interested in decaying plant matter or fungi. They're harmless. They're not going to do anything to you, but sometimes they can occur in very large numbers within a residence because they're seeking moisture, especially during the hot summertime. And so if you don't like them, I guess you can rinse them down the sink or vacuum them up or whatever, but they're harmless. They're not going to do anything to you, but they can be very prominent. And I think the numbers were very large this year because we had such a great monsoon season within Arizona, especially southern and southeastern Arizona. And so that just made all the insect life and other arthropods in great abundance. And so that included things like columbellans. And we also have thysanurans in this region too, silverfish and firebrats. And you'll find them scrounging around, feeding, under sinks and damp areas, also in bathrooms. They're also harmless. They're not going to do anything to you particularly. They may get into some stored products and stuff, but basically, as with columbellans, if you don't want them around, you can dispatch them, whatever works best for you. Okay, this is where I'm going to take the first break. And so are there any questions at the moment?
Yes. Hi, Jean. It's Ellen Sosin, and I have 3 questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is there a charge for insect ID?
No, there isn't. We provide insect identifications as a mission of cooperative extension for the state of Arizona to inform the residents and stakeholders in industry about education. We educate the residents on these things by providing the identifications, by providing extension bulletins. So no, there isn't a fee for that. We had talked at one point about possibly doing this if somebody benefits financially from the information we provide to them because we're actually giving the information. But yeah, we don't generally charge a fee though. No, I don't charge a fee to the general public, to growers, to industry, to, yeah, no charge.
Okay, great. Petra asked, she said that she lives in Ontario, Canada,
Oh.
and that there are cycles of the cinch bug in the summer months, particularly if it's dry. She says if we keep our lawns well watered, it seems to be less of a problem. However, our summer was extremely dry and hot, more so than in past years. What are your thoughts, Jean, on climate change, increased temps and drought on an increased incidence of insects that prefer dry conditions? And how will this likely tip the scales within the insect hierarchy?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, definitely climate change is impacting. I mean, I can tell you how it's impacted down here. We had several years and we're still going through drought conditions, even though we had a good monsoon season here, where we had extremely dry and hot summers here, including our normal rainy season, monsoon season, generally from mid-June to the end of September. And there were several years where we had very little rain. Like I mentioned, last year for monsoon season, we had 1.6 inches of rain. This year we had almost 13 inches. But I always notice, you know, and especially having dealt with the insect in this region for a long time and being observant of their, you know, when they emerge and their numbers and stuff, that a lot of insects in our region were emerging either later than usual, and sometimes when they were emerging, their numbers were less than usual. And also, they wouldn't stay out as long, you know, over weeks or months as normally. And so, for example, I've noticed that with our cicadas. We had cicadas were out at certain years later than usual. The numbers weren't that large, and they seemed to stop being active sooner than they normally would. So climate change is definitely having a big impact. I mean, the thing with a lot of this is we need long-term studies of all the different regions to see how this is going. You need a lot of good baseline data from year to year to see what's going on. And my observations come from observing the insects in my region over the last 37 years. There are some things that I notice these days that are coming out 2 or 3 months earlier than usual or 2 or 3 months later than usual because of the conditions we've had. So it does play a big part because a lot of these insects depend on either moisture or heat or whatever for their development. And if you get more or less of those during their life cycle, that's going to have an impact on the insect populations. And sometimes the insect populations, they'll bounce back. Sometimes it takes longer to bounce back than just the following year or two. But, you know, this year we had a bumper crop of insects in Arizona because of the monsoon season. We'll see what it's like next year, but the last 2 or 3 years, it was pretty dismal. And to the point where people who usually come out to Arizona to see the insects in our region, just like birders come out to look at birds, a lot of them were leaving last year and year before last without seeing the things that they would notice annually. And I'm talking about like in the mountains and the high desert, different parts of the state. And so it does have an impact on what's going on.
Okay. The last question we have before we take that break you spoke about is, can small scorpions jump and move fast?
No, they can't jump. They don't have jumping legs. They move fast. Scorpions move pretty quickly. They can skitter along pretty fast if they want to. And they can kind of lunge a bit, but they're not leaving the ground. They're moving forward. Or they will, you know, flip their tail over the top of the body forward to try to sting whoever might be aggravating them or causing them harm. But scorpions aren't capable of jumping. They don't have jumping legs like grasshoppers or other insects that have that ability. No, they don't.
Okay, well, that covers the questions we had for this first section.
All right, so we'll take a 10-minute break now. And so if everyone can be back in 10 minutes, about 6 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the next part of this talk is going to be jumping into the different insect groups and giving some background on insects about, you know, how they feed, what their biology is about, what's going on with them and such. So, and just one of the things I wanted to show you, I mean, there's so much diversity of insects and they all make a different way of how they get along in life with, especially with something as feeding. And here I just have a list of the different parts of mouth parts alone that you can find whenever you look at all the different insect groups, anything from non-functioning mouth parts to chewing mouth parts to envenomating, sponging mouth parts, ripping and lapping mouth parts. And so whenever I go through all these different groups, you'll see some of these examples. I won't tell you what the mouth parts for every single kind of group is, but I just wanted to show you some of the variety here. And like I said, you can go back to this slide later on and take a look at some of the examples that are here. But I just wanted to show, the diversity of insects is huge. They're like the dominant life form on Earth. And even a group like just beetles, there's more species of beetles described than any other organism on the planet. So when you think about insects as a whole, that sort of tells you what's going on with their diversity. Oops, pardon me. And right here is just a little slide showing what some of these different mouth parts look like, or the organisms that have them. Here's an example of a beetle with chewing mandibles. Here's an immature neuropteran with piercing sucking mouth parts that captures its prey with these, and it removes the prey's juices out of the body. You have some that have piercing mouth parts for predatory feeding, as in this assassin bug here that feeds on other insects, but also there's other reduviids like the kissing bugs that are blood feeders on mammals. We do have piercing and sucking mouth parts and other groups of hemipterans too. And these are generally plant feeders, and they will use these mouth parts to penetrate the plant and feed on the juices. A lot of us are probably familiar with the proboscis on butterflies and the sponging mouth parts of flies for sponging and lapping up food. And also for mouth parts for drinking up nectar, like in the bees. And also wasps use mandibles to chew up their prey items. So they just wanted to give you a little bit of an example of what some of these mouth parts look like and the organisms that are associated with them. There's different types of insect metamorphosis. So anywhere from an incomplete metamorphosis, and there's varieties of this too, where you have an egg, an immature stage, and then the adult stage. And so there's a variety of that with an incomplete metamorphosis like dragonflies and mayflies. And then the one you're probably going to be more familiar with are the incomplete metamorphosis that you see in organisms like grasshoppers or hemipterans and such, where you have an egg, and then from that egg, nymphal stage, a nymph hatches out of that. That's the nymphal stage. It's basically a miniature version of the adult, but in these, they lack certain morphological characters and features, including fully developed wings. Generally, the wings aren't fully developed until the adult stage. And so you go from egg to nymph to adult. And then you have what's known as a complete metamorphosis, which is the egg, the larva that emerges from that egg. That larva goes through various stages and then pupates. And after the pupal stage, then it emerges as an adult. And you're probably more familiar with this for lots of other organisms that you see, like the beetles, the flies, butterflies, wasps, and such. So most of the insects that you probably see on a daily basis, most of those probably go through a complete metamorphosis. So incomplete metamorphosis, egg, immature stage, adult, complete metamorphosis, egg, larval stage, pupal stage, and then adult. So I'm going to start going through some various orders of insects. And oh, I know one thing I forgot to do. Whenever I meant to say on this slide right here, I apologize for that. I went over it and I didn't explain it. The reason why I had this spot is because insects are easy to identify because you have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. So you have three main body segments. That's illustrated here with this fly on the left. You have the head here, the thorax, which includes where the legs are come from or attached, and also the wings are attached and developed from there. And then you have the abdomen. So insects are basically divided into three body regions: head, thorax, abdomen. They generally have three pairs of legs, and those occur on the thorax, as I mentioned, and 1 to 2 pair of wings on the thorax in adults. And the reason why I say 1 to 2 is because generally insects have 2 pairs of wings, fore wings and hind wings, front wings and hind wings. But there are some insects like the flies that have fully developed set of wings and then a reduced structure called a haltere. And there's also a case where you get into some insects that don't have any wings at all in the adult stage. And generally that's because evolutionary history, development, and such. Like, for example, there are certain beetles that live with ants, and they live in the ant nest in a colony. And there's no reason for them to be able to fly around or to do anything like that. So they have lost the use of their wings over time to where they don't have wings at all. And generally, they also have reduced or absent eyes because they live in these dark nests or colonies and such. So sometimes you do see variations and reductions in things like wings and eyes, but generally the whole head, thorax, abdomen, and 3 pairs of legs is the general rule for insects. So right now I'm going to go through some various orders of insects. Some of these you will see more frequently or less frequently than others. The first order I'm going to do are the Ephemeroptera. And these are aquatic insects. We do have these in Arizona. You'll find these associated in aquatic habitats. But we don't generally see them that much here in the rural city areas. I think the last time I saw large numbers of these myself in Arizona, whenever I was up in Bullhead City giving a master gardener training session, and there were tons of these around because of the aquatic situation up there and dealing with water where these things develop. But the adults of these, the immature stage typically feed on algae. The adults are very short-lived, maybe a day or so. And you can see they have these very large paddle-like wings here, the forewing. The hind wing is very small, and they generally hold them upright. And so you'll definitely see these in areas with water, generally rivers and such. And they're very popular during fly fishing season too. You'll see them out on the water a lot during that. Odonata are dragonflies and damselflies, and their immature stage is called a naiad, and they have a hinged lower lip, which is used to catch prey in the water. So this is a case where you have the immature stage that lives in the water, and then the adult stage, the dragonfly and the damselfly, emerge from that habitat, and they live, in the terrestrial, in the air and such. You'll see them flying around a lot, resting on plants. And so they both have, the adult stage have very large compound eyes, and which are good for hunting and such. And 2 ways of telling the difference between dragonflies and damselflies. You'll see here this orange dragonfly. The wings of dragonflies are usually outstretched flat, whereas damselflies on the right, the wings are folded over the body. And so even though these groups are closely related to each other, they do have differences. And so we do have a lot of dragonflies and damselflies in Arizona. There is a lot of water. We get them all over the U of A campus. I see them in Tucson a lot. They get to be associated with ponds and such. And so they're another beautiful insect that occurs in our area. And so they're not a pest at all. So don't even think about that if you see them hanging around on your plants. They're not plant feeders. We have the plecopterans, the stoneflies, and usually these are associated, the immature stages live in cold water streams. And so you're not going to probably encounter these very often. And so I just wanted to throw these in here though, just to show them to you. The immature stage here is on the left, the adult stage is on the right. And so I just wanted to show you just another group of aquatic insects that do live in our state. You're not going to really see them that much in the rural areas, or well, in much of the areas throughout, because you've got to be near areas that have nice cold water, mountain streams and such. Okay, so now I'm going to move over to the Blatodia, and this includes the cockroaches and the termites. These used to historically be considered two separate groups, two separate orders of insects, but in recent years they've been merged together into one order, Blatodia. And so with roaches, the eggs are placed in a structure called the ootheca, and it's a small purse-like structure. And if you see this slide down at the lower right, where I'm circling with a cursor, this is what the cockroach egg case looks like. And the eggs are within this case here. And the nymphs and adults have a head that's mostly hidden by the pronotum, the prothorax right here. And, they have very long antennae, and they have chewing mouth parts, and they feed on a variety of organic foods and debris. And most live outdoors. We do get roaches indoors, of course. We've all probably experienced that at one time or another. They can be associated with unsanitary conditions, but they also get into well-maintained homes too. They generally like to get out of the heat, and so a lot of times cockroaches will get into homes if there's a space through a door or a crack or something where they can get in. And so, the best thing to do with roaches is if you find them, dispatch them. Also, just don't leave any food around that they can be feeding on. Take out the trash regularly, make sure the tops of your refrigerators and stoves are clean, because those acquire debris when we cook and such, grease and stuff in the air. And that also attracts things like roaches. So, but we do have a large variety, including in the middle here. We have some of these native roaches that live in the desert. And this genus Vaga is a local desert roach. It's part of our natural native insect biodiversity in our region. So not all roaches are pests, not all roaches are doing bad or nasty things. And then also associated within the family Blatodia are the termites. Termites are social insects. They have various castes going on within their colony. There's a division of labor with a queen and a king for reproduction. And they have chewing mouth parts, are able to digest dead wood because of symbionts with bacteria in their gut. And there's mainly three types that we have in our region: dry wood, damp wood, and subterranean termites. And some of these, especially the subterranean termites, you'll find that they're tube builders, they're encrusters and such. And a lot of times when you're out in the desert, you'll see a lot of these crustacean of soil and stuff on dead plants. And that's termites feeding on that. They're feeding on the dead wood. So they're good for soil builders in the desert. We do have, not all termites are bad that are going to go after the structure of your home or your building or whatever. They're a natural native species in our area that do their thing out in the desert. They break down plants that are dead. And so that's considered beneficial. Over here on the left, I'm just showing you the reproductives, the alates. You'll see these flying around a lot after a monsoon rain. During monsoon season, a lot of insects are very active, and that's when they reproduce a lot. And after a rain, when you're walking around out in the desert or in your neighborhood, you'll see these swirling clouds of insects flying around. A lot of times that's either termites or ants. And that's what's called a nuptial flight, where the alates, the winged adult forms, fly up in these clouds together, and they mate with each other and they fall to the ground, and then they go off to start colonies elsewhere. So that's why you have flying termites and flying ants. Dermapterans, earwigs. These are an interesting group. They're completely harmless, and they use their little claspers there, or whatever you want to call them, the cerci, these modified cerci, to grab prey, and they use them for capturing prey and also in the process of mating, I think, too. They have chewing mouth parts. They do have a nasty odor if you step on them or smash one or something. But these are completely harmless. They may look intimidating because of these modified cerci at the tip of the abdomen, but they're really nothing to worry about. If you find them and you don't like them, just put them outdoors if they're in a home. One of my favorite insects that occurs in our region are the ambiopterans, the web spinners. And a lot of times people confuse these with flying termites. As you can see, they kind of have the general body shape with the rounded head and the dark wings over the back of the body, folded over the back of the body like alate termites do. But these are a completely different group of organisms. The males are winged, the females are wingless. The cool thing about these, you'll see these a lot around porch lights, lamps indoors, lights outside, and they can rotate their head like a praying mantis. So if they see you, what they'll do, sometimes they will just turn their head back and look at you. It's kind of an interesting feature, which I think is kind of cool. It gives them some character. You'll see the males attracted to lights at homes, porch lights, patio lights, and they'll get indoors and then they'll be attracted to your lamps inside. They build these silken tunnels that they use for under rocks and in plant debris on the ground. You'll find them under bushes and such, in garden areas and yards. They feed on dead plant material, but the males don't feed. And so another example of a very interesting insect. One thing about mentioning this attracted to light, a lot of insects navigate by light at night. And so when we turn on patio lights, porch lights, TVs indoors, lamps inside, we're providing them with a light source that they can hone in on. And so one way to avoid having a lot of insects get into homes is to have lights that, like these yellow lights that don't attract insects at your patio or porch light. And because insects will be able to see lights in your home, like your lamps or your big screen TVs, and they'll hone in on that from outside. And if they can get in, that's why you always see insects flying around your lamps, your ceiling lamp, your table lamp, in front of your big screen TV or whatever, is because they're attracted to the lights. So, we're kind of providing these insects with an artificial light source. So it's partially our fault for them getting into our homes by being attracted to the lights or the lights we have on porches. So one way to reduce this is to maybe use light bulbs that don't attract insects, or not leave all your lights on in your home if you really don't need to have them on. Mantodia are the mantids, which are a very good, well, I should say they're a beneficial group of insects. These are the ones that feed on insects and other arthropods. They have chewing mouth parts, and their forelegs are modified for grabbing prey. And so these are called raptorial legs. As you'll see right here, these will open out, they'll stretch them out and grab prey items and then pull them back in and hold on to them and then feed while they hold them. The eggs, kind of like roaches, are laid like an ootheca, an egg case. And here at the bottom on the left, you'll see an egg case. This is what it looks like. There's various types of egg cases. Some are round, some are globular, some are purse-like, some are look like a bread loaf. And it depends. It's different species of mantids have different kinds of egg cases. In the middle here, photograph, these are a bunch of immature mantids that have emerged from an egg case. They disperse pretty readily because they're so voracious, there's a good chance that they'll probably feed on each other. And here to the right is an image of a unicorn mantid, which occurs in Arizona and is very hard to see. They're very cryptic. You can't see them very easily on plants because they blend in with the plant foliage. But they have this little structure right here at the top of the head between the eyes, and that's why they're called unicorn mantids. They're one of those insects that people come to Arizona looking for to see out in the wild. Then we have the orthopterans next. These are the grasshoppers, katydids, and crickets. And you could generally separate them easily from each other. Grasshoppers have short antennae, and katydids have very long thread-like antennae. And the wings are held roof-like over the body, and generally so. Sometimes they're flattened with like crickets, but with katydids and most grasshoppers, The wings rest over the body, kind of tent-like, roof-like. The hind legs are modified for jumping. These are called saltatorial legs, the enlarged femurs and such, and so they're very good jumpers. There are some species of grasshoppers that don't produce flight wings, but in general, all grasshoppers and katydids and crickets do have fully developed wings, though there are circumstances where there's shortened or reduced wings that can't be used for flight. They have chewing mouth parts. They're mostly herbivorous, feeding on plants, but there are some katydids that have chewing mouth parts, and they do prey on other insects. And so those are some of the shieldback katydids. And, you have auditory communication developed in many of these species. The ears are located on the legs and abdomen. And also, crickets rub their forewings together. They don't rub their wings together or their legs together to make the sound, the chirps that they make. It's their forewings rubbing together with each other. And so anyways, a very diverse, we have probably more species of grasshoppers and katydids and crickets in Arizona than probably most other states in North America. And then we also have the Phasmida, the walking sticks. These are mostly wingless, and they usually have long and short antennae depending on the species. They'll mimic plants, twigs, leaves, branches. They're herbivores. They have chewing mouth parts, so they're plant feeders. They're completely harmless. And they're very diverse in the tropical areas, but we do have different species here. So here on the left, I have a couple of slides of some of the native walking sticks that occur in our area. They're hard to see because, like I said, they mimic twigs and such. And so the coloration, the body shape and length and size. But as you can see in these other photos from Phasmida from other parts in the world, they can mimic leaves, they can mimic branches and such. And so just a very diverse, interesting group of insects. And then I threw in the Phythoraptera, which are lice. You're probably not going to come across these very often. So there's different groups of lice, the Malaphaga or chewing mouth parts, and then the Anopleura, which have sucking mouth parts. And so, and they're now combined, these two orders, formerly two orders, into one order, the Phythoraptera. And they're ectoparasites found mostly on birds and mammals. And so, you may encounter these at times with lice, with kids in certain situations, adults too, head lice and body lice and such. But, you're probably, as master gardeners, you're probably not going to be dealing with these that often. I mean, you're going to probably be dealing with plant-related insects or other home or garden pests. And I apologize for my dog. He's growling in the back because the other dog is licking his face. So next, I'm going to go to the hemipterans. And this is a very diverse group of insects, one that you see in a variety of habitats doing a variety of things. And I'm going to start off here. These have, the hemipterans have the piercing sucking mouth parts that I talked about earlier. And the first group I'm going to show you here are the reduviids, the assassin bugs. And also one of the ones that we are very knowledgeable of here in the Southwest and occur frequently in our region are the kissing bugs. And here's 3 photos of kissing bugs here. This is the adult stage. This shows you the hemielytra with the wings, the way they're developed. But this is an adult kissing bug, and this is an immature kissing bug. This is an example of an insect like the grasshoppers and such that have incomplete metamorphosis. You have the egg, then you have this immature stage here that doesn't have fully developed wings, and then you have the adult stage with fully developed wings and other body parts. So with the reduviids, we have typically 2 types here. The assassin bugs that feed on other insects, like the 2 here on the right that I'm showing you. And then the assassin bugs that feed on mammals. And that includes the kissing bugs, besides humans. They're mainly attracted to pack rats. That's why we get them near our residences. And sometimes they can be vectors for disease and pathogens. But assassin bugs that feed on other insects, like the ones here on the right, they're very important because they feed on potential insect pests in crops and fields and such. So they're considered a beneficial. So while we may think that kissing bugs are a pest because they'll feed off of our blood, the other assassin bugs that feed off other insects are beneficial because they can be attacking and regulating populations of pest species. Another group of hemipterans that are out even now in some numbers, I keep getting inquiries on these, are the leaf-footed bugs. And these are out generally in the summertime, but also in the fall and early, late spring too. And one of the ones that's pretty dominant that is very noticeable because they are so large are these giant mesquite bugs. And that's what's here on these two photos on the left. This is the adult giant mesquite bug here. You see the fully developed wings. And then this is an immature stage, very brightly colored wing pads, no fully developed wings and other body parts and coloration. So, giant mesquite bugs don't do enough damage to kill mesquite trees. You very rarely see them during the summer because they tend to spend their time way up in the canopy of the mesquite tree, but whenever it gets too hot in the canopy, the adults, immatures, both together or whatever, will descend the tree down to the base to get out of the heat. So that's why you generally see a lot of giant mesquite bugs at the base of mesquite trees during a hot summer's day. And then they'll go back up into the tree whenever it cools down later in the evening. And we also have some other Coreids, leaf-footed bugs. Some of these will be feeding on cactus, some feed on other plants. And so they're generally plant feeders. There are no Coreids, leaf-footed bugs that feed on other insects. And so at times people consider these to be pests. They leave blemishes on cactus and other plants that they feed on with their piercing, sucking mouth parts. Other groups of hemipterans are the murids, which include the lygus bugs, and the penatomids that include the stink bugs. And you'll notice here the lygus bug, you've got this heart-shaped marking on the scutellum. And lygus bugs are considered a pest in our state. They can do some damage and they can occur in big numbers. And so, and the same thing too, some of the stink bugs are also, could be potentially be pests. They call them stink bugs because they have these scent glands that produce a variety of odors that they use as a defensive mechanism. And these are herbivores, they're plant feeders. Sometimes they get into things like lygus get into cotton, harlequin beetles get into cabbage and other plants. So generally, a lot of these species are considered to be pest species. And so there's different ways of dealing with them at different levels. Sometimes the damage is innocuous and there's no reason for controls. But if you do think you have these doing damage to your plant, then you should consult your local extension agent. Another group of hemipterans are, these used to have their own order, the Homoptera, but now they're a suborder within Hemiptera. And so the Homopterans generally considered of cicadas, tree hoppers, and leaf hoppers. And these are plant juice feeders, and they also have this piercing, sucking mouth parts. And we're probably most familiar in our region with the cicadas. They're very dominant in, I guess, down here in Tucson and surrounding areas. We tend to get the cicadas here around mid to late May is when they start showing up. Generally, I start hearing them probably about the 3rd or 4th week of May each year. Sometimes that's later than usual because of whatever's going on with the heat and the climate conditions. And also, if we've had a particularly wet, rainy winter, I think at times the soil gets so saturated that the nymphal immature stage of the cicada that develops underground, I think a lot of those get killed off by the overabundance of moisture. So they'll either get drowned or mildew and mold will take over. We all know about and heard about the 17-year cicada that lives in the Northeast and other parts of the country. But here, our cicadas generally, we get cicadas annually, And generally the life cycle of our cicadas is probably anywhere from 2 to 3, maybe 4 years. I'm not too sure underground for the immature stage, but we don't get the 17-year cicada or the 13-year cicada in our region. And so over here at the left, this is an adult cicada here. This is the nymphal stage, the immature stage that lives underground, feeding on roots and such. And we usually see these cast skins that they leave after the immature stage emerges from the ground, finds a place of purchase to hold on to. Then the adult cicada emerges from that. That usually happens in the evening whenever they're able to avoid predators. And then we also have the tree hoppers, which are the membracids. And these are very interesting insects. They mimic sometimes thorns or bumpy parts on twigs and such. And so sometimes they're very hard to see. And then to the right here is a leaf hopper. And some of those can be pests, you know. Sharpshooters are sometimes vectors for plant pathogens and can be pests. So those are also monitored in the state to see what they can be doing to the various plant crops that we have. Another group of hemipterans are the scale insects. You have the armored scales, the cottony cushion scales, cochineal, palo verde scales. It's a variety of scales that we have in Arizona. And so these are interesting because they got like this egg, you know, they go through the egg and then a crawler active nymph stage, and then the sessile nymph stage also, and then the adult. And the males develop one pair of wings. The females generally stay put on the plant and do not develop wings. Just a variety of these things. I get a lot of inquiries about scale insects, especially right now with some scales that we're seeing on palo verde trees in Arizona. So we're starting to take a closer look at that because we need to confirm exactly which species that is and what its life history is. And so working with several people here in the state to try to confirm that. They've been recorded on palo verde before, but we want to make sure that the species that we're seeing is the one that's been recorded previously. And of course, you know, most of us have probably seen the cochineal cottony scale that's on cactus pads, predominantly Apuntia prickly pears. And these insects were traditionally, have been historically, and still are used to produce red coloration. And so the insects are smashed up and they produce this red dye that was used. And famous for making, you know, textiles and such in fabrics in Mexico by using these insects to dye the materials. So, you know, scales can be a pest. They're very difficult to identify at the eye level. So if you do have any kind of scale and you're curious as to what it is, please send it to me because I generally have to slide mount these and look at them under a compound microscope to determine what the species in. And then I can let the client know what the species does, where it's found, what it feeds on, its life history, and then, you know, decisions can be made for treatment after that. Another group of hemipterans are the aphids and the whiteflies, and we're all pretty much probably familiar with those if we have any plants that we've used in our homes. Whiteflies sometimes occur on these. Aphids are a very common occurrence in garden situations, in you know, growing vegetables, whatever. And so these are very common in our state. They're wide-ranging. They can be pests, as I mentioned earlier, with the sugarcane aphid. But it's always good to know exactly, you know, which species you're dealing with to know how to best treat them. And so if you do have a question about aphids or have specimens you would like me to identify, I'd be more than happy to. Please feel free to send them to me. And that way you know what to do, what you're dealing with, and how to take care of it. But another, you know, these are common pest species that do occur in our state. Another potential pest species are the Thysanoptera, and these are thrips. And so one thing I always like to emphasize is thrips is singular and plural. There's no such thing as a thrip. Thrips are singular and plural. So if you find one thrips, It's a thrips, it's not a thrip. So anyways, they're very small. Some have wings, some don't have wings. And the wings generally on these things can be long and narrow with this fringe of hairs. So as you can see in these photographs, these are the wings here with these fringe of hairs along the margins of the wings. The mouth parts are basically a punch and suck. The single mandible breaks up the plant cells, and then the material is sucked up into the digestive system. So thrips can be a pest species, and they are frequently found on a lot of samples that are sent to me. A lot of people overlook thrips too because they're so small. Sometimes people can't see them with the naked eye. But there's also predatory thrips too. And so it's good to know if you have ones that are feeding on the plants or if you have predatory species. So if you do have thrips, you're not too sure which one it is, please send them to me. Excuse me, I will go through the process of identification and let you know what it is. Another group are the neuropterans. These are the antlions and lacewings. You've probably seen the antlion pits. We've got a ton of them here right now in Arizona. I've got tons of them right now in my back and front yard in the dirt areas. So you'll see these pits, they're round. You look at them from above, and what happens is these cone-shaped pits are like an inverted cone that insects that are walking around will fall into the pit. They'll fall down to the bottom of the pit, and at the bottom of the pit, as illustrated here on the left side here of this slide, you have this immature stage that's underground at the bottom of the pit. The insect falls in the pit down to the bottom. The immature stage grabs it with its mandibles, pierces the body, and sucks the juices out of the insect prey. And right here below that is a photograph of the immature stage of the antlion. Excuse me. The adults you'll usually see at night. You'll see them a lot at lights at nighttime. They have these very long, elongate, narrow bodies and these very large, beautiful wings. And they kind of flutter around lightly. And so that's what you're seeing when you see antlions. I've known some people have mistaken these for odonates, damselflies or dragonflies. But no, these are a completely different group of insects. They're neuropterans. And we're most familiar probably in our region with the antlions and also with the lacewings. Lacewings are important because they're important biological control agents. So if you see lacewings flying around at lights at night, excuse me, and or at your lights or indoors or whatever, just let them do their thing because they're very important biological control agents. The larvae are excellent predators on things such as aphids because they also have piercing, sucking mouth parts. So over here at the bottom left side of the slide, you'll see an immature stage of a lacewing with a aphid in its mouth parts, and it's sucking the bodily juices out of that aphid. So, and above that photo, those stalks there, those each individual white globs at the end of the thread of the stalks, those are lacewing eggs. And you probably have seen these on plants and not known what they were, but those are lacewing eggs. And so each one of those little white globs will hatch out as an immature stage. And so this is another example of complete metamorphosis. You have the egg stage, you have the larval stage, the immature stage here. Then in the middle here, you see where they build a cocoon and they will pupate, and then they will emerge as the adult lacewing there on the right. So anyways, the adults vary in feeding behaviors from pollen to predation, depending on the species, but generally a beneficial insect that we should all just let do its thing, and it'll help keep insect populations in control. The next group I'm going to talk about is a very diverse group, the Coleoptera. These are the beetles. Beetles are generally recognized by their forewings or these hardened shells called elytra. And so these are the elytra here. So you have the head, and we're here at the cursor, the head, the thorax, and then the elytra. The elytra are actually the front wings of beetles, but they're not necessarily used for flight. The flight wings are underneath the elytra. So when a beetle wants to fly, It'll open up its elytra, spread them out. The hind wings will unfold from underneath, and then those are the wings that are used to fly with. Beetles are the most species-rich group on the planet that we know of currently. I think like 1 out of every 3 or 4 species of organisms on this planet is a beetle. So they're very successful. They've been able to adapt to a variety of habitats and niches and environments. And part of this is because they have these elytra to cover their hind wings. So when they can get into tight fitting situations or other areas where wings might be damaged for other insects, the beetles have these wing protections that have allowed them to succeed in a variety of habitats. And so we do have predatory species that are beneficials. The first one I'm showing you here are the ladybugs or ladybird beetles. You'll see here on the left, these are what the eggs look like on a plant. This is the immature stage of a ladybird beetle. Then they pupate. This is the pupae right here. And then they emerge as the adult. Very beneficial. They feed on other insects. They're predators. Like I said, they love aphids. Anywhere you find aphids in big numbers, you're generally probably going to find these immature stages of ladybugs feeding on them. And then we also have the Colops beetle here to the right, which is also a beneficial insect or beneficial beetle that's predatory. And those are also good for agricultural and any other kind of plant growing situations. Scarab beetles are another diverse group in our region. They're commonly called May bugs or May beetles, June bugs, dung beetles we have too. Generally the larvae are the white grubs that you'll find in compost piles or in soil, organically rich soil. Sometimes they'll feed on plant roots, so they can be pests in that way. The adults are leaf feeders if they feed at all. And both the larvae and the adults have chewing mouth parts. So here on the left is the green fig beetle that's very common in our area during the summertime. You'll find them flying around. They're one of the rare species of scarabs that actually flies during the daytime. Most scarab beetles fly at night, and they like to feed on fruits. So you'll see them on fruits on trees, cactus fruits. They love the fluorescence of like mesquite trees. They'll get into the nectar and stuff. And then in the middle here is a dung beetle, and those are very active. We have a lot of dung beetle species in our state, and they're good for soil builders too. And then right here we have a bunch of immature stages of scarabs. These are the white grubs. So a lot of times when you find them, they'll be, in this almost like C shape, folded over. And you'll find these a lot in compost piles. Generally, when you see those are going to be the green fig beetles that we have locally. But very diverse group of beetles in our region. Wood-boring beetles is Cerambycids, also a diverse group. These are the larvae feed in wood and have chewing mouth parts. And also the Cerambycids and the Buprestids too. So the Cerambycids are longhorn beetles because of the long antennae, and Buprestids are the metallic wood-boring beetles because they can be very shiny at times. The wood is typically diseased or stressed or some kind of dying or dead wood. And so generally whenever you've got problems and you find these borers in the wood, it's generally not the borers that have caused the problem. It's usually some other stresses, situations that have led to the death or the disease or the dying of the plant. And this is just to give you an example here. On the left here, these are larvae of the longhorn beetles. Here's a couple examples here of many diverse species we have in the state. And then over here are the flat-headed or metallic wood borers, the Buprestids. And these are examples of what the larval stage looks like, and then the adult stage. Again, both very diverse groups within our state. They're easy to recognize because of their body shape, their size, their color patterns and such. But if you're ever in doubt, especially with the larval stage, it's usually hard at times to tell exactly what species the larval stage is, or sometimes even which family of beetle. So if you do find wood borers and you're not too sure what they are, please feel free to send them to me. More wood-boring beetles, another cerambycid, longhorn beetle, or the Palo Verde root borers, which are found in our state. These are the large dark brown beetles you see flying around at dusk and such during the summer. The larvae live in the soil and they move about by feeding on the starches and roots, and usually takes about 3 years or so to develop. They affect stressed plants, non-native plants and such. You know, that one thing about these beetles, the grubs especially, they get blamed for killing a lot of trees when actually the tree is already stressed out or on its way out. And then you get something like a storm or a wind or rains or whatever that knock the tree over. The tree falls over. You see these grubs at the base of the tree, at the roots, and people immediately think, oh my gosh, these beetle grubs killed my tree. That's more often not the case. It's generally other factors that end up to these trees dying, whether it's bad environmental conditions, not enough water, not native to our region. And then the plants are already on their way out. They're not doing well. These beetles get blamed for that, but most of the time, it's not the beetles that are killing off these trees. So anyways, very cool beetle. It takes about 3 years for the grubs to develop underground. Then they pupate. This is the pupa in the middle. And then to the right is the adult beetle. Herbivorous beetles include groups like the Curculionidae, which are the weevils, and the chrysomelids, which are leaf beetles. And these are both very diverse groups within our state. Beetles may be one of the largest, most diverse group of beetles. Weevils are one of the most largest group of beetles that we know about worldwide. Very, very diverse. And so you recognize them. The head is shaped into a beak with chewing mouth parts at the tips. So that's how they penetrate the plant tissue. Whereas with the flea beetles, you'll find these sometimes in large numbers, and they have chewing mouth parts, and they will chew away at leaves. And so you'll be able to notice the leaf damage it's very noticeable. And sometimes they can jump. Flea beetles belong to the Chrysomelidae. They have these enlarged hind legs, these hind femora that are designed for jumping. So that's why they're called flea beetles. So when you get near them, you'll just see them, bing, they'll just fly off a leaf. But Chrysomelids and weevils are two diverse groups within our state that can cause damage to plants. Dermestid beetles, these are more along the lines of groups of beetles that'll, damage stored food products and such. They will damage, taxidermy material. They will damage food products. Certain species of these are nightmares because certain ones of these, the larval stage will feed on the dry organic matter of materials like insect specimens in a collection. And also, so if certain species of these get into an insect museum collection, they can turn a drawer of insect specimens into dust. And so that's one of the things we take caution to keep an eye out for in our museum, is that these do not get into the collection. They do not get into the drawers, so they don't destroy our specimens. A lot of times you'll find these associated with dead bodies of vertebrates. And they're also used to clean skeletons for museum specimens, like skulls and other bones and stuff off the vertebrate bodies. You put these like a skull that's got meat on it in a dermestid colony, and they will clean all that dry meat right off. And so sometimes they're called carpet beetles, but whereas the larval stage does a great amount of damage, a lot of the adult stages are sometimes are pollen feeders and such. So a diverse group, you need to know which ones you're dealing with to know what kind of situation you might have. So if you're curious to know and you collect these, I'd be more than happy to let you know what you got. Darkling beetles, there's not much to say about these. These are pretty much scavengers. You'll see them in homes a lot. Sometimes they get into carpeted areas. The one that most people are familiar about in the desert is a species of Eleodes that kind of quote unquote stands on its head and sticks its butt up in the air as a defensive measure. Some of these flower beetles get into stored um, food products in our cabinets or into dog foods and such. So they're a very diverse group in our area, lots of different sizes, shapes, and such. Most of these are black or dark brown to near black. And some of them have stinky, glands that they use as defensive mechanisms. So you'll probably see a lot of these living in the desert, out in the desert, but also within our homes too. And another group are the blister beetles. So these go through an interesting metamorphosis where you have two different larval forms. One is active, it's called the triangulin, and next is the grub-like stage. A lot of times they're associated with grasshoppers or bees. And we have over 150 blister beetles in the state of Arizona. And the main reason why they're called blister beetles is that they contain a chemical called cantharidin within their body. And they use this as a defensive mechanism that they can squeeze out of the joints of their legs. So here on the left, you'll see this is a blister beetle squeezing this chemical out of the joints of its legs. And it can cause a burning sensation on the skin. And they use this as a defensive mechanism. But some species like this smaller one here that's gray and spotted, the species of Epicata, these are plant feeders, but they get into, at times, they can get into alfalfa hay situations and get caught up with this material when it's baled up and then fed to horses. They can actually cause death in horses. If you get enough of these beetles dead and dry within the alfalfa and the horse feeds on that, it can kill a horse. And I've dealt with some cases where we've had some very sick horses in Arizona, if not deaths, attributed to blister beetles and the cantharidin that they possess within their body. So, and then to the right here, it's the iron cross blister beetle. I'm doing some working on this right now, as well as blister beetles overall for Arizona. And recently they've been occurring in some organic crops in Arizona, and there's concerns that they may be harvested with these foods during harvest time because they're showing up at that same time. And so we're working on that. So it's just another example about how cooperative extension works with growers to deal with potential pest species, and then what measures do you need to take to deal with those. I'm going to go through the flies right now, and when I get to the end of the flies, we'll take our break. So flies are very diverse in our region. We have lots of different groups of flies. The forewings, as I mentioned to you before, are developed for flight, but the hind wings are reduced to these paddle-shaped structures called halteres, and they act as gyroscopes whenever the fly is in flight. So they don't have two full sets of flight wings like most insects do. We're familiar with a lot of the immature stages, the larval stages, the maggots that we find in either food situations or decomposed bodies, or the wigglers of mosquitoes that we find in water. But this is another example of a group. In the middle here, I've got the stages of a life cycle of a fly. You have the egg, which emerges, and then the larval stage, and then which eventually turns into the pupal stage, which then eventually emerges as the adult. So this is another example of a complete metamorphosis. Flies have a variety of mouth parts. I talked about mouth part variety earlier for insects overall, but with flies, you can have piercing and sucking mouth parts, you can have sponging mouth parts, you can have ripping and lapping mouth parts, and even chewing in some and siphoning in some. So lots of different flies, lots of different groups, and lots of different natural histories and how they go about, making a living. One that was really big, not this year, but last spring and the spring before that, were crane flies. The larvae live in soil or in water and can be noticeable in large numbers during damp periods. And last year and the year before that, I was getting lots of calls about larvae of crane flies in people's yards, and then also the adults that were flying all over the place. So a lot of times, they've got these real thin bodies and these long legs and these big wings. And usually people mistake them for giant mosquitoes, but they're not giant mosquitoes. They're not blood feeders. They feed on pollen, or sometimes they don't even feed at all as adults. So anyways, very interesting group of flies. Really nothing to worry about. People get a little freaked out about them because they are so large, and you'll see them a lot on the sides of buildings or near lights and such, but they're generally harmless. And also, one thing to remember about flies, that flies can be pollinators. So like different things like bombyliids or syrphids and stuff, different groups of flies, bee flies and such. Some of these mimic bees, they look like bees or wasps, but they're completely harmless, but they're significant pollinators. They go from plant to plant, and they're involved in pollination. And so people need to realize that there's species of flies out there that are actually very beneficial. Not all flies are pests. Actually, I think compared to the overall order of Diptera, which flies belong in, the non-pest species outweigh the pest species involved. So, and some of these will feed on other insects. So syrphid larvae, they are known to feed on other insects, including right here. I have this image of one feeding on a aphid, and so that makes them beneficial insects. So besides the adult bee being a pollinator, you have the immature stage, the larval stage, feeding on other insects and being a beneficial in that way too. So you can sort of get the whole deal of goodness when it comes to certain groups of flies. So when you see flies flying around outside and they're going from flower to flower, plant to plant, just think of them as pollinators and let them do their thing. Some flies are also predators, or also parasitic. So you have robber flies, which are right here, these two images on the left and in the middle. They have these very big eyes. They're used for hunting. These feed on other insects. And so these photographs here show you images of robber flies feeding on other insects. And so they're predators, so they can be considered a beneficial species. And then you have groups like these tachinid flies on the right, where they're parasitic on larvae, or they're parasitic as larvae on other insects. And the adults are pollinators. So you can consider tachinids to be a beneficial species because they will parasitize other groups of insects, and the adults are pollinators too. So again, another example of flies that are beneficial to what we have going on in the biodiversity of our region. Of course, we do have blood feeders like mosquitoes and deer flies. It doesn't take much water for mosquito larvae to develop. The larvae don't need much. And so that's why it's always good to get rid of water, standing water in our yards, even water at the bottom of the base of a potted plant in a dish. That should be getting rid of, because they don't need much water to develop. And so, we provide a lot of unnatural habitats for these insects and in insects overall. So when we're like watering our yards and doing landscaping and have pools and ponds and things like that we've created, those will attract insects, and insects will take advantage of that. But you really can't blame them for that, because we're the ones creating these artificial habitats for them. So, and deer flies, they're blood feeders. And you see them occasionally. I've got nailed by one here recently. So they are out and about. I don't encounter them that often here, but I did encounter a lot of mosquitoes this year during the monsoon season. Bot flies. Now, these are interesting because they lay eggs on or in flesh, and the larva lives within the tissue, pupates there, and then emerges as an adult fly. So to the left here, this is the adult fly, what it looks like. In the middle is the larval stage, and to the right is this poor pack rat that has one of these developing inside of its body tissue. And they do it to people too. In certain regions of the world, you'll find these things. I've even known people, who let these immature stage of these larvae develop within their skin, on their arm or whatever, and then they collect the emerged adult fly. That's a little more than I would want to probably do to figure it out. It can't be a very comfortable situation, but there's no disease involved with these, just plenty of irritation. So, but we do get these here because we do have a lot of pack rats in our area, and these are a commonly occur within pack rats, so to speak. And then right here, I think this is the last fly image, and then we'll go to a break. This is a gall midge, and you'll see these little galls. You've probably seen them on plants, on creosote especially, these creosote woolly galls. It's a plant growth that's caused by the fly, depositing an egg in the twig, and then the plant responds to this larval development, and the larva feeds inside the gall. And so, but the gall, it's harmless. These galls don't kill plants. And, the galls, like I said, provide a tasty food and shelter for the larvae. But I don't know of any plants that have died from these galls being formed on them. So I say, whenever you see them, appreciate what's going on there. Know that it's part of the developmental life cycle of these particular midges, these flies. And then to the left here is an image of what the adult fly looks like. So anyway, so that's kind of a brief overview of those orders of insects. And so we'll take a break right now before we jump in to the last part of the talk.
We do have a few questions
Yes.
for you, Gene.
Okay.
Yes. All right. So the first one is, do baby praying mantises fly? The males. Do baby male praying mantis fly?
No baby praying mantids fly, because praying mantids are part of that incomplete metamorphosis stage where you start off as an egg, the egg hatches, and then you have the nymphal immature stage with no developed flight wings, and then the flight wings are developed in the adult stage, the final stage. And one thing I wanted to tell you guys about insects, once an insect gets to the adult stage, it stops growing. The insects may get larger or heavier because they're feeding on a lot of food, or the female is developing eggs and such. But once an insect reaches the adult stage, it doesn't grow any larger the remainder of its life. So.
Okay. Is cochineal scale harmful or helpful to prickly pears?
I have not known of any prickly pears to be decimated by cochineal. I think for most people, actually most people I know in Tucson, they just leave it on there. You can spray it off with a hose if you don't like it. That's the only way you can deal with it. There are no treatments or chemical treatments or whatever. If you don't like the cochineal, just spray it off the cactus. But generally, I think stress and heat and even lack of water for cactus, cactus can get under environmentally harsh conditions, even though they're desert adapted, but even cactus have their limits. But maybe if the cactus was weakened, but I personally don't know of anybody who's shown me, or I've dealt with any cases of cochineal killing off a particular prickly pear plant.
Okay. I think the next two are really comments and not questions. The first one is, the larvae of the crane flies do damage in the fall and spring. I mean, I'm guessing that's a statement as opposed to a question. Anne asked that question or made that statement. And you can unmute yourself if you want to clarify that further.
Well, I'm not sure if that's a problem here in Arizona or not, but they are very damaging to lawns in Oregon. So maybe Jean could let me know if that is a pest of concern, because they will kill up big patches. And by the time you've seen the dead patches in your lawn, the damage is already done and it's too late to treat.
That's true. They can be, I should have mentioned that they can, I've heard about them being turf pests and such, but with the way that I'm doing this talk, I'm focusing mainly on Arizona and especially central and southern Arizona. And I have personally not been involved with anybody who was having issues with them and those kinds of numbers, but yes, it has been documented. You're correct on that. They can cause problems with turf.
Okay, I think the next one is just a statement, which is male mosquitoes are also important in pollination.
Yeah, mosquitoes are important. They're important for lots of things. Mosquitoes, they feed a lot of other animals like bats. Bats feed on a ton of mosquitoes. So, whenever I get this whole thing about, people going, well, what good are mosquitoes? Why do we have them? Yes, they're an irritant. Yes, they can be out in such large numbers, it just drives us crazy. I mean, I was going nuts this summer because every time I took my dogs out for a walk, I was having to deal with the Aedes aegypti, the little ankle biters and stuff you get. And it was just an annoying nuisance. But, they're also as a food source for other organisms too. And so, but yes, I do know, there's situations with West Nile virus and such, and we've got to, be aware of these things and do what we can to mitigate those situations. But even the most annoying insects, the ones that we consider to be pests, are also a food source for other organisms too. So everything's just kind of together in this one, web of life and dependent on each other for our existence and stuff. And so, when you see one particular group of insects in reduced numbers or not out at certain times of the year, that impacts other things that feed on it too. And, insects are tied to their food sources. So a lot of the insects that are tied to food plants, when you have a bad year, dry, hot conditions, and those plants aren't out there, that food isn't available for those insects. So that's why we had such great abundance of insects this year, because with all the rains we had in Arizona, the plants were doing very well. The insects that fed on the plants are doing very well. And the insects that feed on the insects that feed on the plants are doing very well. So everything did great this year. But in other times, when parts of that chain are disturbed or missing or whatever, that does have an impact. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out so everybody kind of knows. Well, I'm sure everybody else knows. That's probably why we're all here, that all of these organisms are connected to each other in one way or another, even if they're causing pest situations.
In comparison to bees, how important are flies for pollination?
Flies are very important. Certain groups of flies, as I showed you, are pollinators. Not all flies are pollinators, but a good number of them are. Bees are very important for pollination, and I'll mention them later on in the talk. But with regards to native species of bees, Arizona has the highest amount of native bee diversity compared to any other place in the world except for possibly Israel. And those native bees are very important for pollination of our native plants and otherwise. So bees are very important. I think when you compare the two, bees versus flies, flies are doing a lot more other things than what bees are doing. Like I talked about the bot flies, there are no bees that do what bot flies do. So there's more variety of life history, feeding and such probably in flies than there is in bees.
Okay, and the last question is, not sure if it was a stink beetle or a wood boring beetle, but this monsoon season, we saw an abundance of them. Typically, whenever they were seen on their backs though, with their legs up in the air, kind of flailing a bit. I mean, you could see like 5 or 6 laying upside down. What would explain that?
You know what I think that is? Even though we did have a lot of the darkling beetles, the tenebrionids out, what was out in big numbers, like, was it 2 months or so ago, month
Yes.
or two ago, were the species of ground beetles that are predatory on other insects. And those were out in huge numbers. They are large, they are black, they are
Yes.
confused a lot of the times with what we call the stink beetle or whatever, the Eleodes. They were out in huge numbers throughout Arizona. They feed on other insects, especially caterpillars. They're called caterpillar killers. And they were out in such large numbers this year that I did several news stories with them, about them, with TV and radio and newspaper and such. As with most insects I did this year, because they were out in such large numbers for monsoon. But those were out, and then when you were walking around, you would see lots of these on their back because they were just dying. I mean, they'd done their thing. They did their feeding, they probably mated, and they were at the end of their lives. And the reason why it was so noticeable was because there were so many of them out. We were seeing just tons of dead ones on their back, walking when we're walking on a sidewalk or out in the street or whatever. So I'm guessing what the person was talking about were the caterpillar hunter beetles that were out in large numbers this year. And then when they were dying off, they were just kind of littering the sidewalks and streets with their dead bodies.
All right, all right. Well, that covers it for us. So I think we're ready for the break now. Lori, how long?
Right, we have,
Okay, we ready to go?
we're ready.
Okay, so right now I'm going to talk about the Lepidoptera, and these are the butterflies, moths, and skippers. And so we're all pretty much familiar with these. We see them quite often, and especially this year, we had a huge abundance of these in Arizona associated with the monsoon season, because the plants that the caterpillars fed on did so well this year. The adult butterflies were just in huge numbers and continue to be so. They're finally starting to peter out, but it was a good year for them. Butterflies, you know, they have these modified hair called scales on their wings and body to create color patterns. So the scales that you actually see on the wings of a butterfly, they're not colored. It's the way these scales are designed to receive light and reflection and stuff. That's what causes the color that we see. So basically they're scaly winged insects. And the adults have this proboscis they use for drinking nectar that's coiled up inside their head when at rest. And we're all pretty much familiar with the larvae, the caterpillars. These have chewy mouth parts, and some of them do damage to plants and could be nuisance and pests and such. But generally, and this is an example of a group with a complete metamorphosis. You have the egg, you have the larval stage, which is the caterpillar that pupates, whether as a chrysalis or in a cocoon, and then emerges as the adult butterfly or moth. So a very diverse group in our region, and you know, one that's very showy and lots of enthusiasts get involved with. Oops, excuse me. One of the ones that's very popular that occurs in Arizona are the monarchs. And these are, you know, they're well known because they migrate long distances. The caterpillars feed on milkweed with their chewy mouth parts. And you could generally find these anywhere where you've got milkweed growing. We have milkweed growing here on the U of A campus, and sometimes you come across the caterpillars. And the adults have this aposematic coloring, which warns predators about the chemical defenses. that's associated with feeding on the milkweed. These things just don't taste good. And one thing you'll notice with right here, I've illustrated the different stages. So you've got the egg here on the left, the immature larval stage caterpillar that emerges from the egg. This is the caterpillar feeding on milkweed. And then it goes into this process where it turns into a chrysalis, which is right here. This beautiful bluish colored chrysalis that you'll see attached to plants, sometimes attached to walls. It depends on where it can find a place. And then emerges as the adult butterfly. So I put butterflies out there because there's something we're all very familiar with. They get a lot of press. People talk about their numbers declining and such. There's a lot of debate about that. I couldn't right now give you a lecture on what the pros and the cons are about what people are saying about the populations of monarchs or they're doing okay. But just like any other insect, they're good indicators probably of what's going on with our climate and how climate change over time is impacting organisms on this planet. Tomato hornworms are very common. Belong to this family Sphingidae, the sphinx moths. And this is a very diverse group. And so not all sphingids feed on tomato plants. There's a very wide variety of species of sphingids that occur in Arizona. And one of the ones that we dealt with recently was a white-lined sphinx moth, which was out in huge numbers this year. And especially when you get large numbers of the caterpillars migrating from one source of food plants to the other, it can be quite impressive. And so what you do is you have a case here of the larval stage, which is a plant feeder, which can cause damage to crop and non-crop plants, depending on what you want to tolerate with them. The pupal stage right here in the middle, generally the caterpillar will dig down into the soil and then pupate within that soil and then emerges the adult moth. The thing I want to stress about this is that these moths are also very good pollinators. So sphingid moths, sphinx moths, are excellent pollinators. And so, the species that I was just telling you about, the white-lined sphinx moth that's out in such great numbers, that species of moth you can see flying around sometimes during the daytime or at dusk or whatever, and they flit from flower to flower and they look like hummingbirds, so they're called hummingbird moths, but they're good pollinators. And so you sort of have this situation where people get upset about the larval form eating the plants, but then you have the beneficial part of the adult moth as a pollinator. So to me, I just you tolerate them because they're beneficial if they're pollinating plants. I just threw in the skippers here, the Hesperiids. They're an interesting group of lepidopterans, and you see them not all that often, but they're out there. We do have a variety of them in Arizona, and they're very distinct. They almost look to me like a cross between a butterfly and a moth. But anyways, they're just something that we see a lot here, going from flower to flower, another beautiful little lepidopteran that occurs in our area. And then we have the two-tailed swallowtail. And oops, looks like I forgot the I in swallowtail. And that is the Arizona state butterfly. And as you can see here on the right, the adult, they're black and yellow with the hind wings that have tails at the tips. So that's why they're called swallowtails, because of these structures here. And it's a large group of pileonids of family of butterflies, and we have a variety of those in the state, but the Arizona state butterfly is the two-tailed swallowtail. And the larvae are these pale green color here with black and greenish white neck bands. You can see, I mean, it's not an actual neck, but a region behind the head, and with some blue spots, and they generally feed on ash. But another example of a beautiful larval stage and a beautiful adult stage. So if you see these out, just remember, you're looking at the Arizona state butterfly. Bagworms, are interesting lepidopterans. We do have these in the state, and we have a bunch of these here on the campus at the University of Arizona. And what they do is they construct the silken mobile homes that are decorated with pieces of plants they feed on. So right here on the left, this is the bag. The larval stage is living in that. And here it is peeking out its head here. And it drags this thing around and it uses it as protection. And then eventually it pupates, and then out from that emerges the adult moth. So another interesting group of lepidopterans that people, they'll see these bags hanging off of plants and they don't know what they are. That's what's going on with those. So if you see something like this and you're not too sure what it is, you can always feel free to send me photographs and I'll be happy to help you identify them. And then of course we do get pest species, budworms, bollworms and such. And so lepidopterans can be destructive when it comes to our crops. And so these are some of the groups that we work on at the University of Arizona in the cooperative extension area. I don't work on them particularly, but we do have people within the Department of Entomology at the various ag centers throughout the state who do work on these crop pest species. So like I said, some of the earliest degrees were ag degrees at the U of A. And as far back as then, they were studying crop and livestock species here. Grape leaf skeletonizers are also a noticeable lepidopteran that people might be complaining about that they find in their yard. This is the immature stage here, the caterpillar stage, these yellow and bluish larvae. And as you can see, they can just skeletonize a grape leaf. And this is what the moth looks like here on the right. I used to enjoy these whenever I was a kid because my grandparents in the San Joaquin Valley of California had lots of grape plants in their yards. And I thought these caterpillars were absolutely beautiful. And I discouraged my grandparents from killing them off because I wanted to rear them out into the adult moth stage. But these also provide food for other animals. I have on here, paper wasps are good predators of these. So, what may be a pest species to us because we don't like the damage it does to our crops or to our plants or whatever, which is understandable at times. These organisms are also providing a food source to other animals that feed on them. So it's kind of a give and a take situation. And I put down the salt marsh caterpillars. You probably don't see those that often, but I toss them in here. These are what are commonly known as the woolly bears or tiger moths. And they feed on a variety of plants. And the adults are typically this white color, sometimes with this black speckling on them. And then they have yellowish, orangish, yellowish underwings and abdomen. So I put these in here just because they kind of stand out. And it might be something you encounter and you're not too sure exactly what it is. Like I said, we have so many butterflies and moths in our area. If you're ever in doubt, feel free to send me a photograph. I'll let you know what it is. Last group here, well, no, not last group, before the last group, Hymenoptera. And these are the ants, bees, and wasps. So a very diverse group within our state. And there's not enough that could be said about the importance of bees, especially native bees to our state. But also these other Hymenoptera are important too, with regards to like ants associated with soil habitats and such. And there's also social behavior done with some species of Hymenoptera. But this is an example of a group too that has a complete metamorphosis. You have the egg, the larval grub stage, pupation, and then the adult. So a lot of people probably don't realize that the life histories that a lot of these organisms go through, they just don't hatch out as an egg in the adult form and then go about their lives. They have to go through these life cycles. And so anyways, let me jump into the Hymenoptera. Very interesting group. We have horntails, which are called wood wasps. These are generally tied to conifers. And the larvae found inside are feeding on old, weakened, or diseased trees. So once again, probably not really causing the tree to die or to be dying. The tree is already in that state. It's just kind of easy sometimes to blame the insects for doing this. And they're primitive wasps, and they have a very stout ovipositor, which they use to lay their eggs. And just an interesting group of wasps. People don't really see them that often, though I do probably get 2 or 3 inquiries about them each year. They're very, very cool, but not something you're going to see every day in urban or rural habitats. Sawflies, the adults right here, this is the Hymenopteron, are brightly covered. The larvae, which are right here, are external feeders on foliage, and they'll pupate in a silken cocoon and then emerge as the adult moth. And I get inquiries about them sometime. This right here is plant material with the pupae, or the cocoons, I should say, that contain the pupal stage. And so a very interesting group. People would look at this and they would probably think that was a caterpillar associated with a butterfly or a moth, but it's actually associated with a type of species of wasp. We do have gall makers, like I talked about earlier about the flies, the gall midges flies. We do have gall making wasps, belong to the family Cynipidae. A vast array of species that cause all types of gall formations on oaks and various plants. And so the galls are formed by the plant because a wasp, once again, laying the egg, and then the plant responds to the larva feeding on the plant. And you get these very interesting gall shapes. Different types of gall wasps have different galls. And so right here is one that's kind of round, cylindrical, shiny with red markings. These right here are kind of fuzzy galls. And then these right here are, they almost look like apples, but each one of those has a developing wasp and wasps inside of them. And so I've never known them to cause any issues with killing off plants. And when I walk around the University of Arizona campus and the oak trees on our campus, I will see lots of the varieties of these types of galls. And so we actually have probably the largest collection, well, I know we do, in the state of Arizona of gall making wasps due to the research efforts of one of our colleagues, Jim Zimmerman, who specialized in this group. And we have a huge variety of species and galls that we have to document their presence here in the Sonoran Desert. Honeybees, now, honeybees, they're not native. They're a introduced European species of bee. And so, but they do pollinate, and they're used for pollination in agricultural systems and such, and we use the honey and everything. So they are an important part of what's going on with what we do for pollination. But we need to remember, these are an introduced group of organisms to North America. But generally, harmless, though nowadays you have to assume in Arizona that all honeybees are Africanized. We had Africanized bees show up here in the early mid 1990s, and they pretty much have taken over, integrated into the whole system here. And so sometimes you do come across hives or situations where there's some aggression, and but generally, honeybees are not a threat at all. When you see the swarms moving, they're just trying to find a place to get situated. And anyways, a very popular insect, very well known. But then we have our native bees here to Arizona, leafcutter bees. These are solitary bees. They cut leaves and leaf circles out of the leaves that you'll see in your garden, like rose leaves and such. And they use these to line chambers to raise their young. So this is a photograph here of a leaf cutting bee doing its business, cutting into the leaf. There's a photograph of what you see. So when you're walking around in and you walk by rose bushes or other plants, and you see these semicircular cutouts, punch outs, that's actually from the leafcutter bee cutting this out, taking it to an area to line its nest, and then provisioning the chambers for the young. So anyways, very interesting group of bees. I don't know of any plants that have ever been damaged to the point of dying by this action. Maybe you can just consider them to be nature's groomers, you know, and they pollinate the native flora, the native plants we have. So very important for the desert and the native species of bees we have. And bumblebees and carpenter bees, also native species here. These are large bees. I call the carpenter bees the gentle giants because they're these very large, slow flying bees that kind of just lazily fly around doing their thing. And they nest in flower stalks and rotting wood. You know, you'll find these a lot and see them a lot in the desert area. We get them here very frequently. I see them on campus all the time. And I have never known anybody to be stung by these. So that's why I call them gentle giants. People get kind of freaked out because they're so large, but there's really nothing to worry about. And we also have bumblebees too. Usually found a little bit higher elevations here, very colorful at times with this yellow, sometimes orange or reddish coloration on them with the black. And so another just more important native pollinators for the state of Arizona and elsewhere. I mean, countrywide, native bees play a very significant role in pollination of plants. And then we have the ichneumoniid wasp. I put these in there. These are parasitic wasps. You probably don't see them too often except at lights at night. And the larvae act as parasitoids. The host is killed by the larva feeding on them. And so anyways, I just wanted to throw this in there just so in case you see these at light, you kind of know what they are. These are parasitic wasps and very diverse in our area. And we also have some other predatory wasps here, the tarantula hawk wasp, which is the largest Arizona wasp. And these use large spiders that they paralyze and then put in a burrow to feed their larvae as the larvae developed. They're very well known, and it's a very well-known behavior that's been documented in movies and things like that because of the act of paralyzing the spider and then having the grub feed on the spider while it's helpless within this chamber. And then we also have thread-waisted wasps that occur in our area too. And these, capture and paralyze caterpillars, grasshoppers, and spiders for their nests. So you can consider them to be a beneficial insect too. These are the ones that make the paper wasp nests or the mud dauber wasp nests and such. And so you can consider them to be beneficials because they feed on insects that we would normally consider to be pests. And then we have the velvet ants, the mutilids. These are basically just stingless or wingless wasps, I should say. They're not stingless. You never want to grab one of these because it will sting you and it will be very painful. But they're very dynamic. They're brightly colored. You see the females running around a lot in the desert. They're ground nesting bee parasites and such. And so very interesting dynamic group found in the desert Southwest. And then we have ants. Ants are very diverse in our region too. I think we have more species of ants in Arizona than any other place in North America. And so, and some of the important groups that we encounter are the harvester ants, the leafcutter ants, and the fire ants. So, but there's many more species of ants that occur in the desert, also that get into our homes and other establishments. So if you ever come across ants, please feel free to send me samples. It's hard to take a good photograph of a small ant, and I can tell you what kind it is. But these are very diverse in our region. Sometimes they're a pest species. They can be a nuisance or, give a nasty wallop. But other than that, something else that's just very important for soil development and aeration in our natural landscape. And this is the last group I'm going to mention here, the Siphonaptera. These are the fleas. Fleas are insects, and they're ectoparasites, meaning they live on the exterior of a host. And in the case that we deal with more often is cats and dogs, but they also occur on other mammals too. They have these siphoning, piercing mouth parts where they're for blood feeding. And they have this beautiful morphology, you know, the structures on the body, these combs and such that allow them to stay attached to the host. And, you know, they're flattened laterally, which makes them hard to dislodge and whatever. And they do have a larval stage. It's like similar to maggots. And so you have an egg stage, a larval stage, a pupal stage, and then the adult stage. So those are the fleas. Anyways, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge, first of all, thanking you for inviting me to give this talk. I know it's a lot of information in a short period of time. So that's why you can go back and take a look at this and see what's going on with all the different groups. I didn't cover everything on every slide because it would just be too much information and we don't have that kind of time. I do want to acknowledge the University of Arizona Department of Entomology, the UA Insect Diagnostics Leadership Team, and the insect collection, as well as Cal's Cooperative Extension, Arizona Pest Management Center, that makes all this work possible for studying the diversity of insects in our state, both pest and non-pest species, and getting that information out to the public and other stakeholders so they can be dealt with or just appreciated for what they are. And basically, my take on all this is, if you have the time to watch these insects do their things in nature, take the time to do that, and you'll probably learn some interesting things about them. It's a nice way to spend a few minutes, if not longer. Just give them their space to do what they're doing, and just enjoy the diversity that we have in this great region of the country. Thank you.
Jean, we have a few more questions. Ellen will give them to you, and then we'll wind up our talk.
Can I close my talk here?
No, it's still there.
No, can I close it though?
Yeah, you can close it, of course.
Okay, so Jean, here are the last couple of questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, why do I see bees dying, excuse me, or dead on the sidewalk?
You know, I see them too when I'm walking through campus, and just like any other organism, they get old and they die. And sometimes it could also be environmental. They get too cold and they die. Unfortunately, there could be a chance of insecticides used, maybe improperly, that could be causing their deaths. But, you know, a lot of times when we find dead insects on the ground or elsewhere, it's because they've done their life cycle. They've done what they do. And just like anything else, they don't live forever and they'll just die off generally from natural causes. But unfortunately, you know, we're probably putting things out in the environment too that might also be causing that to happen.
Okay. The next person asks, I have a question regarding the spiders that are in my nectarine tree. What is the best way to remove and displace the spiders?
Well, first of all, it'd be interesting to know which spiders they are to begin with, because, you know, spiders are beneficial. There's spiders like, you know, green lynx spiders that live on plants, and they're hunters and they will hunt down other insects. And well, I shouldn't say like running around hunting, but they're very active hunters, you know, or other spiders wait for something to come to their web. You know, I don't know how to advise you on that, because that would entail you possibly interacting with the spiders directly, and I don't want to take a chance of you getting bit if there's a concern about that. You might have an allergic reaction to it or whatever. But, you know, just understand that these spiders, they're feeding on insects that most likely come to the plant potentially as pests, and so they could be providing a good thing for you there. Spiders don't feed on plant material. So, yeah, I mean, I guess you could always hose them off or have somebody catch them in a jar for you, but you know, I try not to tell people to handle things like that directly, because in case they get bit, they might say that Jean told me to do that and I got bit. So
Okay, the next question is, are orchard mason bees a leaf cutter bee?
Orchard mason bee. I don't know that common name off the top of my head. I would have to look that up. So there's a lot of common names sometimes that are hard for me to associate with a wide variety of insects because it's hard for me to tell what specific insect that is because there's so much diversity. But you know, if the person wants to contact me, they can email me directly and I can find more information on it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. The next question is, large masses of bees at the hummingbird feeder. Is it harmful to the bees because of the lack of pollen, or good to help sustain them?
Well, I think, you know, you're providing them with another source of nutrition. And I've had people talk about this before because they were actually concerned that the bees were bothering the birds and stuff, or competing for space on the feeder. But you know, I mean, I don't think there's any harm in that. It's just maybe another way for them to get some kind of nectar. But I think you would have to have a lot of bird feeders out if you were concerned about them not, the bees not getting to the flowers instead of the bird feeder. So this is another case of us providing an unnatural resource for animals that normally wouldn't be there. And so that's another thing you need to consider too. But I don't think there's any harm in it. I've never seen or heard any documentation to say that hummingbird feeders are leading bees away from native plants and such to pollinate. I think that's what the question was. Yeah.
All right, well, no more questions that I can see, but many, many, many comments that people want to thank you for a wonderful, informative presentation. Just so much information, and people are very appreciative for all of this good information.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that because I know it's a lot of information. It's a lot to cover within the period of time we do this. And I just want people to be able to have a great appreciation for the diversity of insects, a better understanding about them, how good they are for the diversity of life and what we have going on. And also they can go back and take a look at this presentation or the PDF that I sent of just the slides if they want to maybe catch something that I didn't talk about, because there was a lot of information. But I want to thank you all for your interest here. And you know, master gardeners and others are, like I said, the front lines of people providing information to those wanting to know about insects. And so that also helps me with my job because I can't do everything for everybody all the time. And so it's good to have people out there like Master Gardener working with the community and also providing this kind of information to people too, as I said, on the front lines. So
Dean, can you share your email address?
yeah, let me see. Should I just put that in the chat?
Sure.
Okay. So there's my email address, W.E. Hall. That's because my full name is Wesley Eugene Hall, but ever since I was a kid, I go by Gene. So, and feel free to email me anytime about anything. Send me whatever photographs you might have about something you're curious about. It's actually good. If you're not going to send me specimens or drop off specimens, then please have a photograph, because when I get emails about, I've got this small little black bug that's chewing on my plant, that's too broad of a thing for me to figure out. So, but yeah, anyways, I appreciate the time here. I'm glad we could work this out. And thank you again for inviting me to this workshop.
Thank you, Jean. And I just wanted to remind our students that there will be no class next week. That will be for Thanksgiving holiday. Our next class will be December 1st, and Zan Wilson will be presenting cacti and succulents. Thank you for joining us today.